everyone. Welcome to the Stoa. Today we have Ran Lahav with us. Ran's a practical philosopher and author of many books, including What is Deep Philosophy? Philosophy from Our Inner Depth, right here. And Ren joined, in 1992, he joined something called the philosophical practice movement and started off as a philosophical counselor and was doing philosophical counseling for years, became dissatisfied, and developed this contemplative philosophical group activity, both online and with international retreats, called Deep Philosophy. And it was born, I believe, in 2017. And I've been meaning to explore the philosophical practice movement. We haven't had much sessions at the Stoa on it, and I kind of geek out about it. And it's influenced me in my coaching practice. So I'm very excited to have Ran here today with us. And how the session is going to work, I will take in Ran in a moment, and he will present and share his thoughts on what deep philosophy is, and perhaps what just to preface it, what the philosophical practice movement is. And then we'll pivot to Q&A around the 20-30 minute mark. And if we have time, we might even have an opportunity to practice deep philosophy. So that being said, if you have questions anytime, feel free to put them in the chat. Feel free to have your camera on. You won't be recorded unless you ask a question. And during the Q&A, feel free to put your question in the chat. I'll call on you, unmute yourself, and you can ask your question to Rand. If you don't want to be on YouTube, just indicate that, and I'll read your question on your behalf. So that being said, Rand, welcome to the Stoa. And you'll have to unmute yourself. Yeah.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you for inviting me, and it's a pleasure to be here with you. So today, I'm by the way, I'm talking to you from Northeast United States, from Vermont. I grew up in Israel. My name is Ran, but I have been living here in the United States for many, many years. So today I would like to present to you the idea of deep philosophy, which is a kind of movement or a group that has been created in the past several years, but its roots go back much further. Perhaps a better name is depth philosophy, but when we created it several years ago, we thought that for non-English speakers, depth and depth sound too similar, so it's better to call it deep philosophy, but it's really philosophy from the depth, which is depth philosophy. So what is deep philosophy? And I'd like to spend about 10-15 minutes on explaining the general idea, and then I'd be happy to hear questions or comments. So first of all, let me start by saying that we have to understand deep philosophy as part of what Peter mentioned, which is the philosophical practice movement. So what is philosophical practice? Philosophical practice is a movement of people with philosophical background, most of them with at least a master's in philosophy, sometimes more, sometimes philosophy professors, sometimes less. And it came into life, it was born, you can say, in the early 1980s. It was for a while very small, and I entered the field at the beginning of the 90s, about 10 years ago. At that time, there were two very small groups, a Dutch and a German group, and then it started to flourish. I created, with Lou Marinoff, perhaps you have heard of him, we did the first international conference in Canada, and more people came. So what is this movement all about? This is the bigger movement that includes all kinds of things, and deep philosophy is part of it or came from it. And so it's a good idea to first of all understand the basic idea of philosophical practice before we zero in on deep philosophy. So if I had to summarize philosophical practice in one sentence, I would say that philosophical practice is the vision that philosophy can be relevant to the everyday life of ordinary people. It's not just for university professors. It's not just for learned articles and books. It's not just for lecture halls at the university. It can be relevant also to marry the hairdresser and Peter, sorry Peter, for let's say somebody else, Ted, the taxi driver. Okay. So that is the basic idea. And of course, if you know the history of philosophy, you know that in ancient philosophy, in ancient times, it was a common approach that Stoicism, Epicureanism, and other schools were not just abstract theories, but were used to direct people how to live. So philosophical practice in general is the attempt to renew it in a way that would be relevant to modern life. The big challenge of philosophical practice is the how. Because if we look at philosophy, at least as we know it today, at least in the modern sense, philosophy is a very abstract discourse. Okay? On the one hand, it seems to be relevant to everyday life because it talks about the meaning of life, and it talks about the self, and it talks about freedom, and it talks about love. So that makes philosophy a good potential for helping us to live more fully, to live more happily, to live more deeply, richly, whatever. But on the other hand, the ideas that we find in philosophy are very abstract, very general. And when you think about it, our Mary, the hairdresser, her issue is not what is the definition of true love. She doesn't care about this. She has some love issue with her boyfriend, let's say. And our taxi driver, I think his name was Ted, his issue is not what is the definition, what is the general truth about the human freedom, but he himself feels stuck in a certain job. So the big challenge of philosophical practice is how to connect those abstract ideas and in philosophy and everyday life, which is very concrete and not universal. Most of the issues that we encounter, most of the situations that we encounter are very specific to me. They are not abstract general topics or issues about life in general. For me, this is a central issue of the entire movement of philosophical practice, and different formats of activities and different approaches are really different answers to this question. In deep philosophy, which is what I'm going to talk about today, you can see it as one way of approaching this question. Okay? How are we going to use this amazing treasure of wisdom of more than 2,500 years in Western philosophy? And of course, you can do the same thing in Indian or Chinese philosophy if you want, but at least in Western philosophy, how are we going to use this amazing treasure of wisdom to enrich, deepen, elevate life? That is the main issue. That everything we do today is within this picture. Now, there were different kinds of activities that were developed in response, and different groups and different individuals in this philosophical practice movement approach it in different ways. Basically, there are now, I would say, several hundreds of people. It's not in this movement, it's not a kind of huge organization. There are several hundreds of people, maybe a few thousands, no more. And naturally, some of them are more active, more central, and many of them are around. And there is no central government, central pope, which means that different groups may do completely different things. There are encounters between them, there are conferences sometimes, but basically there is no one dogma, one common agenda. So it's very difficult to generalize any statement about philosophical practice, because it's really a combination of lots of things that people do in different countries. It is, by the way, mostly in Western Europe, in Asia to some extent, in Latin America, it's quite active, but for some reason, not very much in the United States. and as far as I know, almost none in Africa. I know a couple of people from Africa, but there is hardly anything there. So what are the different answers to this question, this basic question of philosophical practice? How are we going to use those amazing treasures of wisdom from the history of philosophy to touch, to enrich, to deepen the life of the individual? If we talk about formats of activities, that is the structure of activities, then we can talk about 3 or 4 of them, and I'll mention them briefly before I move on to deep philosophy. So one common format that was already from the beginning is what is called philosophical counseling. And this is the idea that just as a psychologist can meet an individual and talk with them, talk therapy, talk with them about their personal issues, personal problems, and various methods, use various psychological methods to do whatever is needed, the same thing can be done philosophically. So the philosophical counselor is a philosopher, somebody with a philosophical background, who meets a counselee, somebody who seeks some kind of help, once a week, maybe for 2 meetings or 8 meetings or a year or whatever, and they talk about life, about his or her life. But the difference is not psychological conversations. In other words, the emphasis is not so much on childhood experiences, on hidden mechanisms, and so on, but rather on some kind of philosophical vision. So this is one possibility, a one-on-one counselor-counselee relationship where the counselor has behind him or her this entire treasure of wisdom and applies it somehow to the life of the individual, the counselee who seeks help. There are other formats. There is, for example, a rather popular one that is called the Philo Cafe, which is really a meeting once a week, usually a meeting. There is a philosopher who meets a group of people, and there is some kind of conversation that is more or less philosophical, and that is structured by the facilitator of the Philo Cafe. This is fine, and of course, if people are interested in discussing, that's perfectly fine. But the only problem is that it doesn't really touch the individual in a deep way, right? So it's a discussion, it's a conversation. There are some other activities. I was for a while quite active in self-reflection groups where people meet together. Usually it's not an open, whoever wants come, but usually 8, 10 people who come for a retreat or for once a week. And they read some philosophical text and they share their own personal experiences that is related to the text. And in this way, they resonate, you can say, this is my word here, they resonate with the text in their own personal way. So there is the philosophical, that is the seed of the reflection, and the personal that people share, and so on. There are some others. There is, for example, the Socratic dialogue groups, which is a very structured, organized kind of discussion where you learn how to think more than the specific issue. Okay, so the facilitator says, okay, now stop. Now let's do this, let's do that, and so on. And step by step, you learn how to think philosophically about issues. Personally, I was involved primarily in counseling, in philosophical counseling. I have a PhD in philosophy, but I also have a master's in psychology. And that is, and so I'm in between. And that is why I was interested, especially in philosophical counseling. And this seemed to me at that time the most promising way to combine the philosophical and the personal. And for quite a few years, I worked in this direction. And I developed my own approach. I don't want to go into it because after quite a few years, little by little, searching more and more, I realized that's not what I want to do. Counseling is not philosophical enough. If you really speak with a counselee who comes to you about relationship, you can read a little bit here or mention a bit there, some Jean-Paul Sartre, or you can mention some Nietzsche, but basically I found that there is very little philosophy. And I wanted the fullness of philosophy. Philosophy is an amazing thing. It already as a child, as a kid, it touched me as something amazing. And so to reduce it to some kind of trick how to help you deal with your wife seems to me not respectful enough to philosophy, to the richness of philosophy. So for me, the issue is how to have philosophy in its fullness and its depth and its richness, and preserve that, but make it touch life in a deep way, not in an abstract or enforced way. We don't want like, here is a solution from Marcus Aurelius, let's apply it to you. That seems to me a bit silly. So this is a big issue, how to take philosophy in its richness and not give up its richness and touch life and make it deeper and richer, not some easy solutions that they can go to a psychologist, to some kind of psychologist. So that for me is the main reason why about several years ago, about 10 years ago, I stopped doing philosophical counseling. But years before this, I was already dissatisfied and I started with self-reflection groups and so on. And at a certain point, about 20 years ago, I had the idea that there can be a good marriage between philosophy and contemplation, text contemplation. Contemplation is a little bit like meditation. You can call it text meditation, where you try to think, to read, to communicate, not from here, or not only from here, not only from your intellect, but from, metaphorically speaking, of course, it's not physical depth, but metaphorically from deeper inside. It so happened that at that time I spent quite a few very long visits of months or weeks or months, half a year, in a monastery, a very contemplative monastery. And so I also learned the ways of contemplation. And that was my idea about 20 years ago. But ideas take a long time to consolidate. And so it took me a long time, many experiments, some failure, some success, many people that I formed, many little groups that I constructed in order to experiment with it, until I came up with a good format, a good activity for philosophical contemplation. Philosophical contemplation that will deal primarily with philosophical texts from the history of philosophy. Doesn't have to be with the text, but it works well with the text. Will relate to the richness of the ideas, but in a personal way, connecting it to myself. So contemplation, I found out, works well. And it took years to develop, on and off, to develop it. And I had wonderful colleagues who joined me at different times, and we did wonderful things. And then it came to kind of fruition, to a kind of fruit, about 2017. At that time, I was already giving retreats and online sessions. And we decided, okay, we'll call it deep philosophy. And we'll make a little group out of this, and we'll start working as a group. So here I come to the topic of deep philosophy. So you see how deep philosophy emerges from this general vision of philosophical practice that appreciates the richness of philosophy, wants to touch life, tries many things, counseling, well, I don't know, philosophical cafe, not enough life. philosophical counseling, not enough philosophy, this and that, and then, okay, so we have the way. That was my personal path. We have the way, contemplation. Let's contemplate is a very deep and personal way of relating to ideas. And we can regard the history of philosophy as a symphony of many voices, not as true and false, symphony of many voices, many human voices about the foundation of human reality. And let us connect to this amazing symphony of human reality in a contemplative, which is both personal and thinking. It's not just abstract meditation. It's meditation about ideas, about words. It's contemplation. So let me stop here and then say, so what is deep philosophy? Can I explain it a bit more fully? So let me say a few things about what deep philosophy is. So in one sense, deep philosophy is a group of people. We are a community, you can say. We are about 40 people. Naturally, some are more active, some are less active. Some people that are outside the community just come in and out. We give sessions. Some of the sessions are for specific groups. People come and they meet every week, usually for rounds of 4 sessions. And some of them are just open to anybody who wants. Some activities, we have all kinds of activities. All of them are contemplative, but all kinds of activity. And we meet for retreats. When it's not COVID time, then we meet for retreats, and retreats are especially very powerful ways to touch philosophical ideas at the bottom of your heart, in your inner depth. Okay, but what does this group do? By the way, we are international. And again, I don't know why Africa, we tried Africa, nobody from, we have South America, we have North America, we have East Asia, we have Central Asia, we have lots from Europe. I don't know why Africa doesn't work. We tried, it didn't work. We had nobody from it. So, so a few words about what is deep philosophy. As I said, in one sense, it's a group. It's a community. We meet, we work together, we give sessions to people, we give sessions among ourselves, we develop new formats, new activities, we discuss, and so on. But what do we do? What is the philosophical contemplation? And I would say that if I had to summarize it in a sentence or two, I would say that this is the heart of deep philosophy. In deep philosophy, we contemplate, which means we think from our inner depth. Again, it's a metaphor, of course, depth. We contemplate from our inner depth about basic life issues, which are philosophical issues. What is love? What is the meaning of life? What is freedom? And so on. In the togetherness of our togetherness with our companions, we work in little groups, usually 6 people, 10 people, 12, not more. And also in togetherness with a writer, with a philosopher who wrote the text, whether it's somebody 2,000 years ago or somebody 50 years ago. So let me repeat it. It has 3 elements here. In deep philosophy, we contemplate from our inner depth, which means we react, we think, we interact, we speak, we listen, of course, not from here, but in a semi-meditative way, in a contemplative. That's one element. The other element, the second element, is on basic life issues, which means it's a philosophy. We do philosophy. And togetherness. Now, let me say a few words about each one of them, and that we'll understand what we do. First of all, contemplate from our inner depth. It's very difficult to define what is inner depth, but when it happens to you, and sometimes in moments of quiet, you know that there is a different kind of thinking going on. There is a dimension of your being. And for some reason, people usually say it's deep, although sometimes also high, right? And there is an inner silence. There is a fullness. There is a centering of yourself the issue of right and wrong is no longer an issue. It's a kind of vision. You understand things in their depth. I'm sure that each one of you has certain moments like this, that suddenly there is some deep understanding. If you're religious and you prayed, then you probably know that some prayers are like this, but it's not connected to religion, of course. So this is one thing. But as a result, if this is what you want, then you have a big challenge, because our mind, our automatic mind, our automatic pilot wants to analyze, right? It is too busy with its automatic patterns. And so you cannot just say, okay, let me contemplate, it won't work. You have to do specific exercises, which all contemplators did. I mean, text contemplation is an ancient tradition in many cultures. It's not new, and all of them used all kinds of techniques. An example is in the Catholic tradition, which some of you may know, but now it's already also in the Protestant to some extent, is the Lectio Divina, a 4-stage contemplation of the scripture. Right? And and the idea is you must use exercises in order to push out this automatic thinker in you that wants to judge, that wants to agree or not to agree, that wants to go quickly. Right? You have to push it aside. And the way to do it sometimes looks very strange. For example, you take a sentence and people read it again and again and again, maybe 10 times, maybe 30 times, right? So we usually go alphabetically because we are on the screen. So let's say Davud will be first, Fred will be the second, and so on. We can go several circles. Okay? And then you start listening in a different way. And of course, what happens in your mind is important. You must listen carefully and savor the words. Or you may speak in what we call precious speaking. In other words, you can say a sentence or two, not more, and every word has to be precise. So don't say, well, I think that, okay, just say as if you are now giving us a poetic word where every word is important. And this puts you into a different state of mind, and so on. There are all kinds of exercises that are designed to push aside this automatic thinking. And by the way, if you want thinking, in some of our activities, there is thinking, just ordinary discursive thinking afterwards. But the contemplative side seems strange, artificial, sometimes not easy. Not easy just as when you do meditation or yoga. It's not easy. You have to do all kinds of exercise. So this is the element of thinking from our inner depth. The second element of philosophy, we already talked about it. And let me just mention that in the history of philosophy, there are many traditions, many philosophers or schools that were not discursive. Nowadays, especially in Anglo-American philosophy, you would think about philosophy as very analytic, very boring, so to speak, very, I agree, I disagree argument. But if you look at the Stoics that did spiritual exercises and wrote slowly and so on, or you look at the Neoplatonists like Plotinus, that it was really a kind of meditation in philosophy, or the later, if you look at the German Romanticists or the American Transcendentalists who wrote in a poetic way in order to be connected to the larger horizons of reality, then you say, you know, it's just a modern game, this Anglo-American philosophy, to do it very analytic. It doesn't have to be analytic. The history of philosophy is full of all kinds of poetic, contemplative, meditative, introspective, and other kinds of activities. So it's philosophy. What we do is philosophy. It's not analytic philosophy, but it's philosophy. The third element, let me mention. So I said the first element is thinking from our inner depth, and we have exercises for this. The second element, I said, is philosophy, but philosophy doesn't mean what you do in your ordinary analytic class in philosophy, but rather a more contemplative kind of philosophy, which is more closely related to Plotinus or to Marcus Aurelius or to Novalis than to Quine and Wittgenstein. And the third element, let me say, so here we are wrapping up this introduction of what deep philosophy is. So the third element I said is togetherness, and this is an important thing. Normally in everyday life in general, and also in philosophical discussions, we think about each other. You say to me something, you say, oh, I think that the president so-and-so, and I agree or disagree with you, or I think it's a good point or not a good point, and I may argue with you or may be with you and so on. So we think about what the other person said. But in deep philosophy, in the contemplative part, which in some sessions is the entire part, some sessions is part, as I said, sometimes we discuss afterwards, we don't want to think about. Once you think about, you are in a discursive mode. You are in analytic mode. So there is a special kind of interaction which we call resonate. And resonating is a bit like the relationship between different instruments in, let's say, in a jazz jam session. Okay, when I go with my, I don't know, I don't play, but let's say I play the trumpet, and then the contrabass responds. The contrabass doesn't say, I agree with you, I disagree, or what did you say here, right? The contrabass simply, and then the flute comes in and, okay. We resonate with each other like in a jam session. Okay? So the point is not to agree or disagree, but to enrich the world around the text. Sometimes it takes us quite away from the text, but we try to maintain a connection. So we resonate with each other rather than thinking about agreeing or disagreeing, analyzing each other. And that is also our attitude to the writer. Let's say if we work on a text by Plato, usually we work on half a page, in shorter sessions on a quarter of a page, 2 pages at the most. Then the question, is he right or is he wrong? It's really a silly question in the context of deep philosophy. It's a voice of human reality. It expresses a certain attitude to reality, to love, perhaps, if we are talking about the ladder of love. And we treat it as a voice of reality, a voice of human experience, of human thought, of human yearning. And we resonate with it. So just as I resonate with my friends, I resonate also with Plato. I try to understand, of course. There are ways to understand that are, to learn a text that are contemplative, right? But we are not oblivious to what Plato says. Of course, we want to relate to, but like in a symphony, in a music, in a concert. So let me put everything together, and I think we have a view. It was maybe longer than Peter and I planned, but I hope it's okay. So basically then, deep philosophy, or depth philosophy, philosophy from the depth, is a kind of community, but it's also an approach to doing philosophy in a contemplative way. And you can see it as part of the larger context of philosophical practice that wants to connect between life and philosophy. But it's very different from the previous forms of philosophical counseling or philosophy. And in deep philosophy, then, our purpose is to use text, use philosophical texts, specially chosen texts that have the potential of doing to me something, opening my eyes, opening new dimensions of existence, and touching me in my depth and giving me a sense of realness and deep understanding. And we do so using philosophical text in a kind of resonating with each other and resonating with the text. Let me only say, so that is basically an introduction. Now, of course, if you heard it for the first time, how does it go? What's going on? So let me just say, if you're interested to learn more about it, then first we have the website, thephilo.org, without www, just thephilo, deep philosophy, thephilo.org. And you can see there are all kinds of sections there and so on. Or you can simply Google deep philosophy or Google my name, Ran Lahav, and it will be there. But if you want more than this, then I invite you. Just first of all, just contact me, right? Ran Lahav at yahoo.com. Just contact me, and there are new groups every once in a while. Usually, there are also activities that you can come just once and twice, just to taste it. We don't insist that anybody stays for a long time. Some people stay for a very long time, some for just one round or one session. That's perfectly fine with us. You're invited to come to our activities and just taste them. Write to me. I'll give you details. For example, there is a new group coming up very soon, next week. You're welcome to come and see how it works. Can I promise you that it will work for you? Nothing in the world works for everybody. Nothing. Philosophy too is not for everybody. But if this is your direction, if you want to understand in a deeper, inner way, then try us. I hope that this gives you a general sense of what deep philosophy is, the background, what we do, and I now give the microphone back to Peter, or if there's any question or comment.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for that, Ron. I quite enjoyed the breakdown of the practical philosophy movement, sort of like the taxonomy of the different kind of aspects of it: philosophical counseling, the philosophical cafe, Socratic dialogue. And yeah, it's like, Pierre Hadot calls philosophers of life versus philosophers of reason, like modern academic philosophers. And it's like this, I think this practical philosophy scene is the trying to discover the philosophers of or artists of life. And the other thing that struck me as cool when you're explaining the practice of deep philosophy is how it's a lot of other intersubjective, what they call it, intersubjective meditative practices, like collective presencing or circling, or John Vervaeke and Guy Sensok's Dialogos, or Gregory, or I think it's Gregory Kramer's Insight Dialogue. They all have similar movements as what you're doing. And then there's like a lot of the starting point is that inner depth thing, like plugging into what that is. Way I hold it is like the daimon or the daemon, or like that energy where you allow something to channel through you and speak. And there's a certain quality that's like distinct from kind of different intuition or different types of emotion. So I'm curious if you can speak on that more. Like how do you tease that out in deep philosophy?
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned the word daemon. It's the guiding principle. The Stoics, this movement, the Stoic movement that was active for 600 years or so, very central in the ancient world. Of course, Marcus Aurelius and Epictetus and Seneca talked about the daemon, or the guiding principle, as a certain aspect of our being that is more central, is free, and is pure, clean, and interestingly, resonates with the cosmos. It resonates with everything. Now, if we want to accept their theory or reject it, it doesn't matter. But what they realize, like many, many other people in many traditions, is that there is a certain aspect of ourselves that feels different. Whether we theorize about it, oh, it's our daemon, and that's where the seat of reason and of freedom, or whether you want to talk about it as the higher self, as some romantic German romanticists in the 18th century talked about it, or whether the oversoul, as Emerson and the transcendentalist, American transcendentalists talked about, or in any other way. It's clear that all those people who say those different things, higher self, oversoul, daemon, and of course in other traditions too, recognize that there is a certain dimension of our being that we can get in touch with sometimes. And it's not just an emotional part. It's not a matter of feeling. It's also not a matter of intensity, nevertheless. It can be very intense, very deep. It doesn't have to be very intense. It doesn't have to be. It's a certain dimension of our being where a different kind of thinking, different kinds of, I would even say, understanding. Now, I don't want to impose any specific theory about it. But one thing I would like to say, and this is a little bit, it resonates with Karl Jaspers, who was an important existentialist psychologist and philosopher in the 20th century. It overcomes, I think, the subject-object distinction. The experience, at least the experience, I don't know in theory, but at least the experience is you are not I thinking about. The standard way that we think about the world, about ourselves and the world, is through the visual metaphor. You know, vision, I'm here, I look at the tree over there, tree, I think about it. And when we think theoretically, we think in that model. Because a theory, what is a theory? I have a picture of reality, and reality is over there. Is the theory correct or is it not? Okay. Also description, even an article about what happened yesterday in France is you have an article, you have a representation, and the world. So it's a representational kind of thinking. But I think that in that special moment of inner depth, then there is a different, at least in your experience, you experience it differently. You don't experience yourself as separate from the thing. You don't think about. It's not a subject-object relationship. It's some kind of resonating that I hesitate to theorize too much about. And at that point, it's a new horizon that opens up to you. Right? You see the richness of the idea, the many threads and colors that come from it. So this, I think, is the experience. Sometimes it can be a very powerful experience. This happens for us, especially in retreats. In retreats, when you have 2, 3, 4 days together, and you contemplate morning, afternoon, sometimes evening, it's very taxing. It can be a very deep experience. Suddenly you see the world, not in a subject, or not as an ordinary theory, as a thought about, but somehow you resonate with the reality that you contemplate. It's a deep experience. In online sessions, we usually our sessions are, as I said, 1 hour, 1.5 hour, our standard session. We have also shorter ones. They're online, it's not as powerful, but it can be powerful.
Awesome. So we'll get the few other voices in. Do you have a hard stop at the top of the hour, or could you go a little bit longer?
I can.
Yeah, because there's some really good questions. I'd like to get to a few of them, and it would be good to have like a 10-minute practice session if you're willing before we close.
We can try.
Cool. So Robert, I think, has experience with your work, and he's pretty plugged into a lot of the other stuff that's happening here at the Stoa. So Robert, if you can ask your question.
Yeah, I own a couple of your books, and I'm a huge fan of your website. If no one's been there, definitely check it out. It's very good. And my question, I'll just read it, but then I had kind of thought about it. It says, when people do these practices across time, do they tend to emerge with any predictable changes, such as like accepting things more or like quitting a bad job? Or is it more diverse? And what would be some signs that an individual could notice, or like, especially if they wanted to change, but maybe they were prone to bullshitting themselves or took it as entertainment? Like, how would they have a sense that something good was happening?
Yeah, this is a very good question. What is the effect or the intended effect of DP sessions? I think that I would like to answer in 2 ways, and sort of one voice and the other voice. One voice is, it's like a prayer, a non-religious prayer. In a prayer, you don't go to pray because it will give you something, it will do some product. The prayer itself is significant at the moment that it happens, right? It's important, it's valuable, it's rich, it's precious. And that's good enough. Okay? The same thing about music. You go to a concert not because it will give you something. You go to a concert because it's valuable at the time that it happens. The other voice, I think I learned from deep philosophy, that we can accept different voices. We don't have to either or. They sort of enrich each other. Is indeed to look at the effect, the long-term effect of deep philosophy. I think from seeing a lot of self-descriptions of people describing what happened to them, I think that the general view is it opens us to broader horizons. We learn to relate to life in a richer and more open way, to relax our tendency to think in patterned way, and to be, in this way, we develop our ability to be, you can say, a mensch, a bigger person, somebody who has wisdom. Wisdom is not smartness. Wisdom is somebody who has a bigger world, a richer world. And so it develops a certain attitude, a certain inner attitude to see the fullness of life. So I think that people often describe how their normal, strict patterns melt away little by little. You can call it self-transformation, but self-transformation is a big word. And people, I don't believe that people completely change, but they can open themselves, enrich themselves, and become simply a fuller human beings with greater appreciation of life.
Any follow-up thoughts or shares, Robert?
No, I thought that was so beautifully put, and I was kind of hoping to hear something like that, since you've seen so many cases, so to speak, and it affirms some of what I've seen in people and in myself. So that makes a lot of sense. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Robert.
I think Richard's question is a good follow-up to that. Richard, if you'd like to ask your question.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Ron. It's not a good question in my mind anymore, because you already said, my question was really about prior skill develop. I mean, the ability to contemplate is a skill that a person has to develop. And so the question was, or the comment was, it seems to me that a person would need a lot of prior skill in order to enter in. But you've already said, I think correctly, people come, taste, and see. And, if somebody comes and tastes and see and wants to develop the skill of contemplation, then of course they can.
Yeah.
So let me change the question into a more personal one, if I could. Unless you think I'm off base on what I just said.
Go ahead.
This is personal. I don't know when you moved to Vermont, but did the move to Vermont play any role in your shift from counseling into?
Yeah.
I asked that because I'm from Vermont.
Oh, you are. Oh, nice.
Originally, I live in North Carolina now, but it's amazing to me, and this has happened long since I moved away, how many deep thinkers are living in Vermont in places like Hardwick. Anyway, if you could comment on that.
Yeah.
I mean, the geography, the place space.
Yeah. Thank you, Richard. Both questions are very good. First, I would say the first question is, who is it good for, right? Don't you need people who have a background in contemplation or philosophy or both, and at least skills? I tend to think that contemplation is not just a skill. I agree with you, Richard, that it's also a skill, but we start from zero, so that's okay. But there is, some people just resonate with music, sometimes some people don't. Some people can read poetry, some people are very intelligent and everything, but poetry is not their thing. And I think the same thing I see about contemplation. Some people with all the goodwill, it just doesn't stick. It's not theirs. And I don't think that it's just a matter of, oh, stay another 4 times and you will be there. I think that some people, it's not their thing somehow. There are different tendencies, and for me, it's perfectly okay. Just as there are many voices of reality for us in deep philosophy, and that's what we are interested in, and not what's right and wrong. In the same way, it's perfectly fine that people are different people. Glory to God, so to speak, that that we are so different, and there is no intention to think that everybody, if you only stay a little bit more, you'll see how wonderful it is. No, there are people who see beautiful things in others. That's perfectly okay. And by the way, the deep philosophy group is not oriented towards expansion. We advertise very little. Only when we have a new group, we want a few more people. Expansion is not our thing. In fact, we had a conversation about this in the board of our group several weeks ago, and I said, I shudder to think what will happen if we become 2,000 people. We'll have headquarters, and we are community oriented. We are a small group of people, and we enjoy working together. So that's about the who. The who, I think it's also dependent on a tendency of the heart. Philosophy, I don't think that people need to know philosophy. They have to be interested in ideas, but they don't have to know any philosophy. We have quite a few people who don't have any philosophical background. Of course, they would not be very good facilitators. We have to train them in philosophy in order to facilitate the group, but to participate in a group, they don't have to know. Now, the second question is perhaps more personally interesting, and thank you for asking this personal question, Richard, about whether it played a personal role, the movement to Vermont. And I would say my history, my intellectual history is divided to 2. There is the time that I was at university, from my BA, from my first years in philosophy. I remember sitting, and on the one hand, being so attracted to philosophy, with the ideas of philosophy, and on the other hand, bored and frustrated that it has to remain on that level. And somehow, because of the lure of philosophy, I stayed with that, although I contemplated going to other, just leaving philosophy with its university and so, nothing objective, it's not me. I want to go beyond just abstract, just a very structured intellectual activity. And I was very good at writing articles and so on. So it was not practical frustration. It's just, and then in the 1990s, mainly in about the middle or the beginning, middle of the 1990s, I encountered the monastery I mentioned. And I started living there on and off. And suddenly I felt this is what I want, some kind of thinking in a richer way. And I'm not a Christian. I did not connect with I don't subscribe to any specific religion. So it's not the religion that interested me, but it was very meaningful time. And the monks were extremely accepting, didn't expect anything of me that I would believe, or didn't try to convert me. So, and from that time, I realized that I'm no longer in academic philosophy. I can still teach, and I do still teach. I can still be there, but I am in a different. I'm going in a different direction. And so one of the activities one of the things that happened as a result was moving to Vermont. After you feel whatever you want to call it. Sometimes I call it Lu, L-U. It's a word that I borrowed from a book, an anthropological book about about the jungle tribe in Brazil. Lu, not to say God and not to say oversoul, just a word without meaning. When you are totally open to new horizons, and nature is so important to you, and you get tired of this endless talking and talking from here that doesn't mean anything. Yeah, where do you go? You have to go to nature. Now there is wonderful nature in Ohio too, but who would go to Ohio for to be touched by nature, right? So I naturally went to Vermont.
Thank you. A couple things you said there, and I'll be swift. I mean, glory to God that for the differences in people, I completely agree with that. What would life be if people were all the same?
Yeah, yeah.
And the other one is, I can think of so many outlets, when 10 people read the same sentence, one after the other, and you use the word resonate, but, it's almost a form of improv. Yes, and let me read it. Yes, and let me read it. And these are practices. These are not ideas.
Right.
So anyway, thank you very much.
I think most people are superficially different, but fundamental.
Sorry, someone just jumped in. Please put your question in the chat if you have something to share. Oops. Any other share that you wanted to close off there, Richard? Sorry about that.
No, I just want to thank you again, Ron, for your presence.
Thank you, Richard.
Let's Davu's question is really juicy. I was going to ask it myself. Davu, if you could ask your question, and then perhaps after that we can pivot to a practice.
Sure. Thanks, Peter.
Wait a
And
minute.
thank
Why
you.
was I not allowed?
Thank you, Ron, for your presentation. Could you please elaborate on why you found philosophical counseling, your practice, unsatisfactory? Because somebody might say that what better gateway into philosophy than our personal problems? Because these personal problems can be, as someone said, the embryo of philosophical thinking. They can grow. If they grow sufficiently, they become philosophical. So why that you found that didn't happen? Was it the problems themselves that weren't philosophical? They were like practical problems that you could just solve without philosophy? They didn't call for philosophy? Or was it the client's attitude that didn't demand philosophy? Thank you.
There are so, all the questions that are being asked are so good and deep. So thank you, Dawood, for asking this question. First of all, let me say that my dissatisfaction with philosophical counseling is not an objective kind of dissatisfaction that says it's a bad thing. Rather, it's relative to my purposes, my vision. It doesn't satisfy what I hope. So for me, the problem is not so much the result problem, the result issue. In other words, my problem is not, oh, it doesn't work. My problem is that it's not philosophical enough. And by this, I mean that when a person comes with a personal issue, for example, relational issue, then the center is really my problem, my relation. And the depth of the philosophical text, even if I use a philosophical text, and normally I don't, is secondary. It's a little bit like the difference between music and music therapy, or dance and dance therapy. I did movement therapy just to see what it's like. I remember I did it in a certain period of time, kind of dance therapy. Now, in dance therapy, you don't do dance. In music therapy, the purpose is not to do music. The result may be quite bad. What is important in music is to what in music therapy is to what extent your problems are resolved, or your self-understanding grows, or whatever. In other words, the decision whether to do A or B is guided by what will be good for the counselee, not by what will be deeper philosophical. And indeed, I've been connected to a lot of philosophical counselors. I was always quite central, not the most central, but quite central in the activity, in the international activity. And I knew at that time quite a lot of approaches. It was hard for me to see what was philosophical there. there was a common statement that you mentioned, Davud, that, oh, we deal with problems, but problems are a door for a deeper philosophical understanding. It was very difficult for me to see that. So this is one direction of my problem, that the emphasis on the well-being of the counselee means that I must sacrifice the richness and depth of philosophy for the sake of his or her well-being. Just as a simple example, imagine that the person says something about love, okay, about the nature of love, and you think, well, philosophically, it's quite nonsense. I can easily show you that's not, but it's precisely what he needs psychologically now. He needs it because so obviously I will not argue with him. Okay, so I missed philosophy for the sake of his will. But from another perspective, let me just say one more quick thing, and this is, why counseling? Why counseling? Why in 1982, those two tiny little groups, one in Holland and one in Germany, Germany was a little bit before, why did they do counseling rather than something else? Not because of some logic that really it fits philosophy, but because that is what was available. Everybody knows what counseling is. It's available from psychology. So the easiest thing is to take an existing format and to apply it to yourself. Like to say, oh, I'll do the same thing. Why not search for a format that is more good, better, more appropriate for philosophy? So there was an easy way, and unfortunately, it seems to me, this decision in the 1980s that I think was a thoughtless decision to copy psychology remained with the philosophical movement until today. No reason other than momentum from psychology. Try something new. Philosophy is not, you want to do something new, try new things, not necessarily deep philosophy. Try new formats. Why just copy from psychology?
Any follow-up shares, David?
No, thank you for your response.
Cool. Yeah, I resonate with that. Let's try something new. So perhaps we can try something new now. Whoever wants to stay, they can stay. I think the exercise is about 10 minutes, Ran. So would you like to lead us to get a taste of what deep philosophy is?
Yeah, I can give you a couple of exercises just to get a taste of what it is. Of course, it's out of context. Usually we start with a little centering exercise and we have to have a different state of mind. We cannot do everything. So just to give you a sense of a couple of exercises. So I need the text.
All right, I'll put it up on the screen now.
I chose just for the example, Marcus Aurelius. As you may know, he was a Stoic, an ancient Stoic philosopher. And let us use this text to do several exercises. So first of all, the first exercise that we'll quickly do, we want to understand the text, right? We just see it, and maybe some people don't have a background in philosophy and they don't understand it. So we use the exercise that we call interpretive reading. Interpretive reading, we start reading, so we keep the flow, but we are allowed to add a few comments, just a few comments. So we resonate a little bit, but the purpose is it's not completely meditative yet. It's still understanding. Okay, so let's use, since we don't have much time, let's do just the first sentence. Okay, so I will be the first, and after me, Davud, I can see here Davud and Peter. Okay, so just the first sentence. You must always bear in mind, it must be always in your mind, what is the nature of the whole cosmos and what is my own nature. I must always not be stuck in myself, but remember the bigger proportion of the cosmos and how this is related to that, how I am a little part of the whole, and what kind of part I am. The wood, please. Same thing. If you don't want to add any interpretation, that's fine. If you want just a little interpretation, not too much.
And there is nobody who
No,
hinders
please
you.
go again from the
Oh,
beginning.
same.
The same
Okay.
sentence.
Same. You must always bear in mind what is the nature of the whole cosmos and what is my own nature and how this is related to that, how the nature of the cosmos is related to my nature, and what kind of a part I am in the whole. So maybe there are different kinds of parts, and the distinction between different parts are important. We should identify what kind of part I am in the whole. Peter.
Thank you. And Peter, just before you continue, the rest, please try not to think about and to move. I know that hearing 3 times one after the other may be quite annoying and your eyes want to go elsewhere. Just try to feel the words, the sentence, the images. Okay, just try to be with the text. So please, Peter, read the 3rd time. The same sentence.
You must always sense into the whole and into oneself and how the two are related and connected, and how one moves the other and is influenced by the other.
Thank you. So we did interpretive reading. Now, normally we have much longer text, so we may have several paragraphs and so on, but now we understand the text, okay? So this is an exercise, we use only 1 sentence. Usually there are paragraphs. Okay, now we are ready to go more deeply into contemplate. We already are in this flow, but we want to go more deep. And now let us use, and we'll do 2 exercises. That will give you enough of the taste. It's out of context and we have to be in it, but at least you'll get the text. And we will do what we call ruminatio. It's like the Latin, and you can think about it as a mantra. Okay. And what we do is we take some important sentence and we say it again and again and again. Okay. And here, let us use the 2nd sentence. And everybody, as we read it again without any interpretation, just again and again, just, even if you're bored, just be with the words and be attentive to images or thoughts that come into you, but be with the reading. So, Richard, you'll be the first, Robert after Ed, Christopher, and Danielle, okay? I'll read again the names. It has to be go. Oh, no. So Richard first, Robert the 2nd, Ed, Christopher, and Daniel. The 2nd sentence, just repeat it, and everybody just be with it. I will read, and after me, Richard. And there is nobody who hinders you from always doing and saying the things that are according to the nature of which you are a part.
And there is nobody who hinders you from always doing and saying the things that are according to the nature of which you are a part.
And there is nobody who hinders you from always doing and saying the things that are according to the nature of which you are a part.
Add your microphone, please.
And there is nobody who hinders you from always doing and saying the things that are according to the nature of which you are a part.
Christopher.
And there is nobody who hinders you from always doing and saying the things that are according to the nature of which you are part.
And there is nobody who hinders you from always doing and saying the things that are according to the nature of which you are a part.
Thank you. Let's do another round. And think about it as music. We are listening to music of ideas. If it's easier, you can close your eyes and listen. Each one of us has a different accent and different melody. Okay, and the readers can also change the melody. So again, me, and after me, Richard, and so on, just as before. And there is nobody who hinders you from always doing and saying the things that are according to the nature of which you are a part.
And there is nobody who hinders you from always doing and saying the things that are according to the nature of which you are a part.
There is nobody who hinders you from always doing and saying the things that are according to the nature of which you are a part.
And there is nobody who hinders you from always doing and saying the things that are according to the nature of which you are a part.
And there is nobody who hinders you from always doing and saying the things that are according to the nature of which you are part.
And there is nobody who hinders you from always doing and saying the things that are according to the nature of which you are a part.
Thank you. Let us now move to another exercise, and that will be all for us to taste what it is like. And the other exercise, we call it precious speaking. Now we want to be more expressive. Now we want to express our own voice, not only to listen to the voice of Marcus Aurelius. But when we speak, every word is precious. So, as opposed to the ordinary model of speaking, which is the faucet, in your kitchen, you open and blah, 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 blah. Here, every word is important. Think about it. It creates a certain attitude. Okay, so don't say, well, I think that. Just say exactly the real sense. And I will ask a question. And you, let's do it in the same order. But now I lost the order and who is first and who is second. So so with Robert, it's the same, but it can be also without any order. Let's do the same order. If you have nothing to say, just say pass. Don't force yourself. And the question is, so let us be in this text. And the question is, imagine these moments, these special moments that happen when you feel that you're part of the bigger world, maybe in nature, in a moment of nature. Or maybe when you stand with lots of people and you feel I am part of everybody. Those special moments where you're touched with how small you are, but not in a negative way, in kind of awe and amazement. I'm part of the world. What do I feel or realize in this moment? What do I feel or realize in a moment of I am part? Okay, take a few seconds and try to just let yourself speak rather than tell us some theory about something. Just speak from from this moment. If you cannot think about the specific moments, just feel them. Try to imagine. Okay, so I will start, and after me, Robert, in the same order, because I cannot see everybody. When I'm a part of the whole, I am smaller and yet I am bigger than usual. Robert? You have nothing to say, just say pass.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. Being in a time when all of the radiance of everyone has room to exist, I feel free.
Thank you. I'm sorry we skipped Richard, so please, Richard, it's your turn.
I stand exalted as a vital part of a glowing, limitless whole.
I think it's Ed now. This is,
Yeah.
for me, it's very confusing. I don't see everybody, and usually we know who is before who, and we use alphabetic names, alphabetic order of names, but here it's so confusing. Ed, please, and then Christopher, and then Danny.
Last night, I saw the constellation of the plough and felt a recognition that this figure has always been here in the latest years of the earth.
Christopher, please, or pass, and then Danielle, or pass.
Yeah, it gives me a feeling of safety, which pushes me to take more risk and demonstrate more courage.
Thank you. To be strict with the method, you would say, I feel safe, instead of it gives me a feeling, because it gives me already, now we think about you. I am safe. So, thank you, Christopher, and Danielle, the last.
I feel almost a through line vibrating from the innermost core of myself that is kind of like inexhaustibly in me towards the infinite, but there's still a vibrant connection between those two points which I can never grasp, but nevertheless hold me.
Nevertheless, thank you, everybody. So this is a taste of the kind of exercises that are more listening. You know, you can have others that are more putting things together and developing your own voice, but this is the beginning often of a text, the kind of how we approach it. Now you can feel what we do, and you can take it to a more discursive direction, or stop here, or stop in the middle. There are all kinds of levels of it. At least we understand now what it is. We don't have to rush through a philosophy book. We can stop and taste it, resonate with it, sense it, sense how others speak. There's a lot to do from here. Thank you for your wonderful participation. Really very good resonation. I'm impressed.
Beautiful. So we'll close out here. And I just love, like, you know, discovering stuff like this. Like, and I love the vibe of, you know, not wanting to get big or scale. You just kind of like do your thing, and then who finds you finds you. And we need experiments like this, definitely, if we want to be artists of life, as Pierre Hadot advocates for. So I'll make some closing announcements in a moment, but Ron, do you any kind of closing thoughts, anything you'd like to leave people with if they want to learn more about your work?
I'm really satisfied with our interaction. And the only thing I want to say, if you have if you want to try, you can come for one session or two sessions. No strings attached, no commitment. Then you're most welcome to write to me or look at the website. And there are new activities all the time, so you are most welcome to contact me and join and enjoy. Thank you, Peter, and thank you, everybody, for our meeting.
Beautiful. And I'll make some closing announcements in a moment, but everyone, if there's a good introduction to check out what is Deep Philosophy, you can get that. I got it on Amazon, but you can get it on Rand's website as well. And Rand, thank you so much for coming to Stoa today. Would love to have you back. And tomorrow, a session, if you want another kind of experimental modality, we have the flow game, the art of crafting powerful questions. It's a modality that has some similarities to deep philosophy, but it's about kind of crafting a beautiful question. So you can check that out on thestoa.ca. So that being said, Rand, everyone, thank you so much for coming to Stoa today.